I Am Interchange. This is the Hatch podcast series.
It seems now more than ever that we have found ourselves on the cusp of monumental worldwide change. Whether we consider the environment, politics, infrastructure, health, economics, or inequities across a broad swath of social constructs, the consensus is clear and urgent. All is not as it should be. The United Nations, a consortium of 193 member states from around the globe, agrees. In 2015, the UN unanimously adopted the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. These goals call for urgent action in global partnership to secure peace and prosperity for people and the planet, now and into the future.
In alignment with the SDGs, Hatch, a curated network of artists, activists, and entrepreneurs working together to accelerate positive global change, has partnered with I Am Interchange to fuse adventure journalism with experiential design labs to develop innovative solutions to complex global challenges. What does it mean to heal, emotionally and mentally? As we begin to peel back the protective layers of denial, isolation, internalization, projection, like so many filters obscuring what is, what has happened, what lies beneath, we are left with something alien, raw, fragile, and often unconscionably unfamiliar. The process is painful, and physically, when a burn brings blisters, a bone breaks, cells become cancerous. From where does the healing come? What happens inside that cast? Under that bandage? How do we harness the body's ability to heal, direct it where we want it to go, to supercharge it? I'm Tate Chamberlain, and here I sit down with acclaimed stem cell researcher and scientist Christian Draper and Philip Robinson, a licensed clinical social worker pioneering collaborative mental health care systems for all, to explore the potentialities and potholes inherent to healing in all its forms and facets. We're in Egypt. Join us, won't you? This is the Hatch podcast series. I'm Tate Chamberlain, and we're here in Egypt. And we've got Christian and Philip in the room. Thanks so much for being here on a Hatch adventure, and we've got a great conversation for you today. Hey, guys.
Good morning. Good morning.
Bright and early. What almost kept you from being here today?
Today or on this whole adventure?
Yeah, either.
Today, nothing was keeping me. I was excited to come and be with you. On this trip, I think it was really just being at this specific time, so busy at the office and so many projects that are being launched that it was almost irresponsible to leave. But I'm glad I did. It was a great adventure. Now I need to fly back to responsibilities.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm going to say the dual tensions between work demands, which are constant, and then I live for the fall, so I can get out in the grouse woods, and it's beautiful in Wisconsin this time of year. I look forward to it. And that was my one inhibition. Otherwise, it was go.
It's true. You're a hunter.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you have a dog that flushes them out?
I have a wonderful English setter.
Cool.
He's a great companion.
Awesome. What kind of toys did you have growing up?
Oh, man. I did not have many. I guess my toys were, I guess like many boys of my time, just our bicycle, hockey stick, and baseball glove, and that was pretty much it.
That's a good question. I had quite a few gadgets and things that I would tinker with, and I found them much more interesting if I could take them apart and rebuild them. So radios and contraptions and things. And I became a dumpster diver, and I would find all kinds of weird things and drag them home and recompose them. And they had a lot of magic that way versus a complete thing. Didn't hold much interest.
Nice. I resonated with both of you. I took things apart in my bike and probably a stick and race cars.
Yeah. No, but it's true. As I remember now, I probably not was not an electrician like you were, but I would use I would build like small electrical motors and things like that. Yeah, I did like to do that.
We're in Egypt right now. What's your connection to Egypt been like?
I guess for me it has been, of course, there's the history of it. I mean, we can sort of intellectualize about it, but for me it was just the joy and the warmth of the people here was not that I would say it's rare. I've been to other places and oftentimes you find this kind of things, but here it was exceptional. I mean, everybody is like genuinely just happy to see people coming by and visiting them. They seem to have at heart to make you feel welcome. I was really touched by that.
Yeah, I have almost the same answer. It's just so apparent in the availability of the heart and just engaging and greeting and the warmth. And then with our crew as well, and how everybody else is experiencing the same sights that we're seeing, and just integrating it all. It's just beautiful.
The people on the boat are part of Threefold and the Hatch Network, which is, like social chemistry said, is like art, activism, and entrepreneurship. Is there a moment in your childhood, like a distinct moment, that made you that way?
For me, I would say, and it's hard now to remember where it was. I seem to remember that it was fairly young, but, with the distance of time, when exactly it was. I would say probably 14 years old. I read a book about, let's call it neuropsychoimmunology, the stress, anxiety, your emotion, your experience, and how it can affect your health. And from that point on, I was just focused on the brain. I remember, it may have been younger, because I remember I met my sixth grade teacher a few years ago. He was my favorite teacher, so I went back to Montreal and I spent some time with him. And as we're there at lunch, he shares with me, I had forgotten. He says, I just remembered the first day of school, you came to class and your question was, Michel, can you tell me how the brain works? And then he says his answer was like, let me check and I'll get back to you. And hoping that I would never ask the question again. And I did not. But I grew up and I went to study neurophysiology. Like, brain research has been something that has always attracted me. But, at 13 years old, that was already on my mind. And I think I connected to that book. And
your teacher never got back to you about it?
He never got back to me about it. He never did.
Did you ever see him again to tell him that?
Actually, it's him who reported that to me. I met with him, and then he was sharing with me that, we were just reminiscing about our experience together when I was a kid. I stayed close to him quite a bit over the years.
And funny. And he told you that story
exactly,
about him kind of blowing you off?
Exactly. Just how he was hoping that I would not come back with that question.
That's marvelous. Yeah, I was thinking it's interesting that you stepped into that space at around 14, and I really identified my interests in some sort of exploratory service at that time. I was a military brat and attending Department of Defense schools, and the one in England, and we were rather transient as a family and looking for this sense of home and understanding of who I was and my heritage and where I come from. And I developed this fascination with Carl Jung. At that time, I came across this because I was interested in archaeology and anthropology, and I felt like here's somebody who can explain the human condition through symbols and archetypes. And I was blessed to have teachers who, in these schools, that would take us all the way up to Orkney and spend a week, visiting ancient sites. And so this archaic history was a really compelling force for me. But it was really the study of psychology and the mind and spirituality that I clicked into early on. And I just knew that would be my path, and I would provide that in some way. And I would explore new pathways using those tools. And I understood that, and it stayed with me over time. And I've come in and out of it, but it's clearly been there.
What's fascinating, we started from the same place. And I remember when I was, things have changed dramatically, but I remember as a young boy or a young teenager, adult, really being fully immersed in the thought that if you're interested into the mind, you need to go and study the brain. Mm-hmm. Because if you don't study the brain and you do psychology, you're studying what the mind makes up. And I just wanted to go to the heart of it, so the brain. And to the point where if I spread this thought to everything that was around me at the time, I was completely uninterested in art, for example, because art is made up. It's not reality in its true nature. as a boy. And then in my life, I kind of went through the other side of the spectrum and just realizing what is there. It's what you make out of it, that is really relevant. So it just brought me back to the old, to where I started in a way. But it's interesting how, as a young individual, whatever is there in our mind dictates a lot of where we go, at least initially.
It does. And I really love hearing your challenge of illusion. And I had this notion in my mind of, being an explorer, being somebody who traversed new ground, okay? Somebody who goes into uncharted territory. And then I realized at one point it's not a physical thing. It's actually, I realized the new frontier is really inner space. It's understanding the mind. And how do we get to core truths? How do we know what we can trust and rely on? Because I just saw so much fluff and utter and baloney around us. And that was a compelling desire to find that thing that that was real. Yeah.
I'm curious to know a little bit about what you're working on right now. And so what project are you most excited about that you're bringing to the world?
Well, for me, it's a project that it would take quite some time to kind of wrap everybody's mind around it. But if I summarize it in a few words, for the past 20 years, through very, I would say, traditional scientific investigation, facing a problem, an observation, let's call it, that we can't explain, try to find a way to explain it, go to the lab, test that hypothesis and see where it leads. And basically one thing leading to another, really working on switching from brain research to going to stem cell research, and then basically revealing, elucidating what is the natural role of stem cells in the body. We talk about stem cells, you can extract them from various sources, treat them, re-inject them, but they're in your body to begin with. So if they're so regenerative, then what do they do in your body? Number one. And number two, can we tap into the power of your own stem cells in your body? So stumbling upon plants and plant extracts that trigger the release of your own stem cells. So the research around all of that and bringing this whole concept to the public.
What did you find in those questions you were asking?
Well, it all started for me working with an aquatic botanical called Aphanisum amphilos aqua, AFA, better known as blue-green algae from Klamath Lake. I was hired by a company to start this research in 1994, 1995. Very quickly, it was clear that the product had anti-inflammatory properties, immune support properties, and most people consuming it would report an effect on mental clarity, mental energy, a sort of mood elevation. So we very, very quickly isolated active compounds that explained all these benefits. But as I'm going through all this research, I came across cases of people who reverse multiple sclerosis, Parkinson, Alzheimer's, emphysema, heart disease, liver failure, joint issues. So you hear all these stories, and the first thing that is striking is it's touching like so many different systems in the body that it's hard to understand what could be the mechanism of action. Number one. Number two, the extent of these benefits, but they're not studies. They're just people telling you their stories. But some of these stories were like undeniable. Like one story that stuck with me over the years, and it's really the one that pushed me to really try to say this is true. Let's see what's behind this. Was the story of a lady. She sent me a photo album, and there was a letter with it in which she's describing how at age 12, she's walking with a kerosene lamp. She tripped, and she burned herself face, chest, and arm 3rd degree. She's heavily burned, heavily scarred. So 50 years later, at age 60, she starts to take this product. The scars starts to get inflamed, red, and itchy, but she described in the letter, it felt healing itchiness. So she continued. She took a picture of herself in the mirror every week, and she ends the letter by saying, go and see the photo album. And you go through the album, in the last pictures, there are no scars left. So you can't deny something like this. So that was kind of the motivation to try to find what was really behind this product. And one thing leading to another, we discovered that it works by triggering the release of your own stem cells. When your stem cells are in your bloodstream, they are the repair system. So they'll go and repair what is broken. So they go into the pancreas of the diabetic, the skin of that lady, the brain of the Parkinson, and so on. So that was the process.
You mentioned MS, multiple sclerosis. My mom has MS. How would it be applied to MS, and what would it do?
Just like any kind of condition that you can mention that is associated with the loss of a typical type of cell. So MS, for example, is the loss of Schwann cells that will make the myelin around neurons. And it plays a very, very critical role in accelerating the transduction of a nerve impulse along a nerve. What makes you coordinate, for example, turning your head when you hear a noise, and if you want to walk in that direction, moving your foot at the same time, in spite of about a 3-second delay normally between nerve transduction from your brain to your eye, which is very close to your foot. Myelin does that. So it gives you coordination. If you lose that, you lose coordination, you lose the ability to move. So Schwann cells can emerge from stem cells. So this was done in the lab, so you can show that a stem cells can transform into a Schwann cells that makes myelin. And then in animal models, they have shown that if you trigger the release of stem cells, they can improve. And then we have many cases where we have seen these kinds of benefits. So it's essentially this very basic role of stem cells. They can transform in virtually any cell type of the body, even in the brain. The notion that I studied with at the Montreal Neurological Institute that the brain does not regenerate. This is an old idea. We know today that the brain does regenerate, and it comes from stem cells.
Awesome. Do you have a follow-up question?
Well,
or conversation?
Not a question, but your question in terms of, just because I'm actually on the other end of the
let's go through
which is much more external.
We'll dive into each other's and then we'll just mesh them together.
Because
cool.
I've been developing place-based strategies for behavioral health services and community-based programs for children and families and individual adults as well. But my focus has been so much more external and really looking at community resources and development of programs and services that bring a multiplicity of stakeholders together to help craft an environment that supports healing. And my concept of the greenhouse of the mind, or for the mind, is really based on looking at the environmental circumstances that help people heal and grow. And what do we need to be able to mirror that back? Understanding there's a biology in play as well, where you're very well focused, and what happens externally? How do we carry that forward? What are the forces that then impact us and circle the healing back around to the individual?
You know what is interesting there, because what we do is so complementary in a way, Philip, because healing goes through stem cells. Like we've never talked about it before. You break a bone. The doctors will put a cast and will tell you, come back and see me in 6 weeks. We never say what is going to happen in that 6 weeks. It's almost like the black box. You come back and suddenly, gee, I'm healed. Mm-hmm. What happened in that time frame? It's your stem cells. Now we discover this whole aspect of our body. We have a repair system. Mm-hmm. So anytime we talk about repair, healing, whatever, stem cells are involved. But there's a lot of things that we can do outside to support these stem cells, to support them, like positively support them. And there's a lot of things that we can do to suppress their effect. So there's a lot of things from a behavioral standpoint that will support, definitely does, whether we know it or not, supports our ability to repair.
Yeah, you got it. And that's, we see this again, like in addictions, where, you can have a medication that helps address the dopamine issues, but it's also a change of behaviors and a change of environment, and a change of supports and lifestyle and everything else that has to go with that to complement that. Anyway, I'm not sure if I had any more on that, but it's really just looking at both, what's happening on the external that reinforces what's happening at the chemical or cellular level as well. And how do we address addictions is a good example of one of those intractable conditions that we're constantly trying to address at both ends.
And following what Philip just shared, there is a new frontier in the whole world of, stem cells, because that's sort of my window to it, but obviously touching a lot of other things. But if we talk about healing in the mind, completely, we know there are a few things that we know, but it has never been studied. And it's the fact that you need your brain to release stem cells from the bone marrow. If you use methods to release stem cells, but you also put in the body a blocker of noradrenaline, you will not release stem cells. You have on all your nerve terminals and all your fine capillaries, you have nerve terminals that can release neurotransmitters into the blood circulation. Your stem cells have receptors for all the main neurotransmitters. So when you put all of that together, the body has the machinery to basically say, with your brain, your mind, your state of mind, voluntary or involuntary, you will affect your ability to repair. So going back to what you were saying, people having various states of mind, dealing with various challenges of the mind, or mental health is bound to also have an impact on their ability to repair.
Right. And that's where does, ask you this question if it's okay, because I see the power of attention and then intention in terms of the healing process.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you see that as having an impact on what you've been able to measure in some of your own?
Of course. I mean, of course, I see. That's a little bit what I'm trying to say is that the machinery to link intention and state of mind to the healing exists.
Yeah.
It has never been looked at from what I understand or what I know in terms of this new mechanisms of healing that we are just discovering with stem cells. The fact that your mind in general, your emotional state, your state of your ability to concentrate and focus on the process as is known to really be able to enhance healing. I mean, you have cases of people with spinal cord injury who sits down and spend most of their time just visualizing the repair, of the spinal cord, and they do repair. There is a mechanism that is beyond that. Whether we know it or not, there's a mechanism. So it now, with what we know with stem cells, it has to be stem cells. And we know that the machinery is there to make it happen. So I think, this is there. We can make it happen.
Right. And that's where we see value in mind-body medicine practices with addiction or any kind of mental illness. And in that, the collective approach, it's not just about an individual meditating. That's valuable, but then how do they do it collectively? And how do they reinforce each other? And then how many supports beyond that continue that growth and that learning? And that sometimes that's the holding environment that an individual takes with them, and it keeps that feedback loop going back to the mind, to the cell, to the repair.
And when you think about it, it brings a whole concept, that I would refer maybe like the hygiene of the mind. How do you somewhat control your mind to not let it go into places that are destructive for you, places that create in you a state of mind that is not really helping you? It is crucial in the mental health of anyone.
Exactly. One of the fascinating things in the healing business of mind is we see people will spend an enormous amount of money. They'll travel great distances. They'll make extraordinary commitments to their enlightenment. They'll go across the world. They'll transform their life. They'll put everything into this pursuit of enlightenment and healing. But there's one thing they won't give up. It's the last thing they'll let go of. And it's negative emotions. They bring them with them.
There you go.
And they hang on to them. It's fascinating.
Is there trauma could be like a lifelong thing to work with.
Oh, yeah.
Is that wrong to bring those emotions with you to work on healing, or is there a way to completely get rid of that?
I'm going to jump at that.
Yeah.
It's not wrong to bring them with you. We do anyway. They are us and they come with us. And what's the best approach is to bring them with you and then learn to let them go and give them their place, okay, to accept them. And then look for options among those, okay, to not fight it, to not, either try to control it or avoid it, but to actually, let that speak, because there's wisdom in that pain. There's wisdom in that hurt. But sometimes people stay at the negative manifestation of that experience and they don't let it guide their insight. Okay, they don't let it grow.
This is Philip, the expert, speaking. So I will have to defer to Philip. So this is his expertise. So I can just add one thing, which is truly just the experience of one person who is in that quest, for enlightenment and all of that, which is, it's not wrong to have it, but it's just to understand that we have it because we feed it, we carry it. It's not attached to us. It's not chained to us. We feed it, we maintain it, we cherish it in a way, in a strange way. We cherish it. We feed it, and somewhere, to me, it is to understand, when you dive at the heart of it, that trauma is associated to a person that we're no longer that person today. It was the best that person could do at the time. It's the best that person could do to deal with that situation at the time, provoked by someone who did his best at the time, in his worst, did his best to deal with his things, and to just look back at these two individuals and just say with compassion, you screwed up, you were not really good at it, but it's the best that you could do, and I don't need it today. It's not what I am today. And then it allows you to just let go of all of these things. I mean, I won't say easily, but I think it's a deep understanding to realize that none of them is there because it's attached to us. We feed it, we keep it, we carry, we identify with it. It's our identity. Who are you? What happened to you? Well, this happened to me when I was a boy, when I was a kid. We identify with it. And that, to me, is where the problem is. The moment you identify with it, how do you let go of your identity? Mm-hmm. So to me, as an individual walking this path, that's how I see it.
Yeah, beautiful. Beautifully said.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah. And that identity piece is really key in what we attach to in that way. Mm-hmm. And I was just thinking, you reminded me of something my dad said when I was younger. And he said the thing that's on your mind the most, okay, that's the thing you actually worship.
Absolutely.
And that could be your job. It could be your car. It could be a kid's grades. It could be a lot of things. Okay. And we have to, understand kind of where do we want to be? Where do we want to go with that? But understanding it compassionately is the first step, isn't it? And being able to see we are responding to a whole array of mechanical forces that we think that we have a whole lot of choice, and we do to some degree, but we first have to realize that we are in this layered experience of action, reaction, force, resistance, and then somewhere in that we're able to make a choice. That moment that, like Viktor Frankl would say, that pause between what we're experiencing and then how we want to respond.
And that pause is the golden key to the whole thing, and which is what meditation is. You pause and then you just pay attention to like a few questions. First question, what is the atmosphere of the majority of my thought? Right there, you've got your answer. Right there, you know what you're generating for yourself in your life. You are doing it. Nobody else does that for you. These are your thoughts. I mean, we can go deeper. They're not really yours, but maybe another discussion. They're thoughts that at least you pick up and you feed and you maintain. That tells you the future that you're developing right now. And
I love that. What is the atmosphere?
Yeah, what is the atmosphere of your thought? And then the second question, and we all have that answer. The second question is, okay, what am I doing in my life that feeds that? And the answer is, it's staring in your life. You'll find the answer right away. You know what it is that you're doing that maybe you should stop doing in terms of habits, patterns, and all of that. And you just stop and you ask these questions. And what else should I do instead? And normally the answer is just the contrary of it. You find a motivation in the contrary of it, and that's it. You're in charge of your destiny.
Yeah. It's hard to add to that.
In your space, it's, I don't know, there's a lot of different perspectives in the world. Is there any one or thing that is kind of resisting you right now?
I'm going to say, I think, misunderstanding, okay? The preconceptions that people have, that we all have of ourselves sometimes, and then what we realize that other people may have, or their availability to really understand and be present to a message that's different. And I find that I'm constantly having to navigate very gently that territory. And it requires that I pull back sometimes and really become a little more strategic in how I unpack information for people, whether they're, politically very different, ideologically very different. I'm trying to navigate because there's these filters in what people will accept and let in and are willing to use and learn from. And then it's how do we tap what's true to most folks? What is that core understanding of the human condition that we can relate to, and then build it out from there, so that the external signifiers, the ideologies, the political gripes, all that BS, okay? So we can just get to what's real.
It's the same thing that Philip is talking about for me. Maybe I'm looking at it or experience it through a different window, but I'm very much sort of the archetype of the scientist, meaning the lonely guy who does not necessarily have a very developed social skill of like mingling with people, engaging in conversation. If you talk with me, I have no problem with it. But personally, I'm just a very like hermit style. And now as I'm growing all this research on stem cells and need to really develop community, need to really bring the message out. I've got to really interact with people and really step into that role. which does not scare me. It's just that I'm not skilled at it. So the resistance that I'm facing is just to realize that 99% of the problem that I'm facing, that I have to deal with, is people. Mm-hmm. It's the humanness in the situation, how to handle it, how to handle people's reaction, how to, people.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And how to understand all the different languages that are in play. Because I think you've had to kind of move through the scientific and the research language, and then there's all these fields of people, and I experienced that too in our first conversation. Zeal over what you're doing, and then let's understand that, how exciting that is, and then how do we make this something that people can approach and utilize and translate. And it's fascinating how a great idea confronts that many more barriers to perception and understanding. Okay.
No, you're correct, Philip. We talked about this before. So if I'm facing an obstacle now that is really, let's put sort of people aside, an obstacle is which is mind-boggling to me, is that I can show you videos of quadriplegic getting mobility by releasing their own stem cells. You do not improve a quadriplegic. Like right now, for example, in Spain, we're starting a study, and the neurologist is telling me, I knew it, but he emphasized it. He says, in Spain, if somebody has a spinal cord injury and is paralyzed, we send them to Toledo. This is the spinal cord injury center in Spain. But he says they don't go there for treatment. They go there to learn to live with their handicap. You don't do anything to a spinal cord injury. So I'm showing you a video where a spinal cord injury patient 14 years later starts to improve. I would expect this to be a little bit compelling, really? What happened? What was used? And if I show this to neurologists, they look at it and they glaze over it, and that's it. They're on to the next topic. It just does not. And I'm trying to understand why something that has, we have stroke people to reverse. We have people on the heart transplant list who are normalized, not long, in a matter of a month or two. We've got all these results. And I think I'm facing a little bit what Einstein said, you come with something new, and it's the next or the second generation that will just accept it. It's just butting head with the traditional, everything that we've learned in school. Stem cells in med school until now. Stem cells are precursors to blood cells. They don't become cells of other tissue. Completely untrue. But because it's not coming from academia, because it's not coming from the actual pharmaceutical medical establishment, it just does not penetrate. What do I do to make that knowledge penetrate? Because it's not just one or two studies. It's thousands of studies that are out there in the literature showing that this is happening. Yeah. How do we make that sink in?
It's a huge question.
Tell me if you have the answer, because I don't have it yet.
I appreciate your understanding that, as Einstein would say, it does take a couple of generations for the knowledge to sink in and become, commonplace and accepted. And I think at the same time, all we can do is put new innovations out there and bring people from different disciplines into that so that they can start to see it from their language and their value set and their perspective in life. And the more they do, something gets encoded at deeper levels for that pathway. And then it starts to weave. There's more threads in that tapestry, and they start to connect, over time. And taking an innovation, something that we may see the value of in the moment, we see it, but we don't really know where it's going to land. And in a lot of ways, it will transform as we go. You can only be in it, your version of it at the moment, and then give it to as many people, to give it away. It's like Jonas Salk giving away the patent to polio, and then, not that I was suggesting we all just,
No. Philip is a wise man.
But there's something about letting people have the value of that healing and experience it and translate it on their terms and then share it. Okay. And when we approach it through the specialty with controlled lenses, sometimes monetarily or in terms of the discipline or the journal article or all that does is keep it in a narrowed pathway. And so this idea of giving it over to the greater collective to weave it in, that's really what I'm trying to say.
I mean, like deep thanks for sharing this, Philip, because you've expressed something that I'm realizing is really the path forward, and that's what we're starting. But I had never thought of it in these terms, and it's extremely helpful, because what I've realized over the past, I would say maybe year. I mean, I've been doing this for 20 years. You release stem cells. Stem cells will go to the pancreas of the diabetic, the lung of the COPD, of emphysema patient, the heart of the heart patient. They will go where it's broken. So that means it's good for everything. And it took me a long time to realize that if something is good for everything, you don't use it for anything.
Right.
Because it's not in your mind as the thing for that problem. And our mind is trained that way. You've got one issue, you've got one solution. And that's what we're starting to do right now, to basically package the information for one specific application and let that people ask the questions to design how they are going to use it, what it will mean for them. And so that's the path we're taking right now, which is what you just expressed, you know.
It is.
So,
yeah. And I was thinking about this too, because, to translate that into the circle of physicians, there's two primary filters that I experience. One is the physician's particular specialty, and the other one is the ego. and they have to be able to, kind of ideally embrace it through their specialty, and then it has to be theirs in some way. And then ideally, if they practice in a multidisciplinary setting, then there's more people that would then experience that. I was just thinking the pragmatics.
It's spot on. It's what it is. The dance is to provide the information while allowing them to be in their field of influence, to be really the star that they are in their field of influence. Yeah.
I'm curious about a time in your life where you felt the most powerful and the most powerless.
At once?
Different times, or at once, but
okay. I mean, I'm sort of always like talking about the same thing because it's been so much of my life for the past 20 years. I remember the day. So let's go back here 20 some years ago. I'm working with this plant, this blue-green algae, with people having benefits on their skin, their heart, their brain, their lung, their pancreas, their liver. What is this thing doing? And we don't have an answer. And one day, somebody sent me an article. The title was Turning Blood into Brain. The first observation that a bone marrow stem cells left the bone marrow, went into the brain, and became a brain cell, at a time when stem cells are only precursors to blood cells. So I'm reading this paper, then I go and dig in the scientific literature, find the same thing on the liver and on the heart. So I'm thinking, if stem cells can become heart, liver, and brain, why not the rest? They have to be able to become the rest. And if they become the rest, it has to be the repair system. And I'm thinking, I'm having this plant here that is bringing many kinds of benefits. What if that plant is stimulating stem cell release? I mean, these are a lot of what if, all put together to your point where it's a fairy tale at the beginning. And then we start to dig, and that's what we find. We go to the lab, we find that this plant is releasing stem cells. The reaction for me was, oh my God, we just resolved disease in the world. I mean, I remembered this short amount of time when I'm just thinking, wow, let's just tell that to the world. It's changing everything. And soon after, realizing that it's just nobody hears it. I mean, absolutely nobody hears it. So there you go, the high, and then after that, the low. And that low has been for a long time. I remember being in a lecture a number of years later, talking to a group of doctors. And at some point in the lecture, he cut me and he stood up and he says, I need to tell you something, son, because it looks like he was older. I need to tell you something, son, because it looks like nobody is telling it to you, but you're just an idiot. And it didn't hurt me, but I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, wow, and I told him, I says, if you want, I can go in my room. I was writing my book at the time. So I had with me all the papers that I needed for that book. I was traveling with a suitcase of paper. And I said, I can go and get all these papers. They're in my room. He says, don't waste your time. You're just an idiot. And I'm thinking, and that was my moment of realizing, okay, this is not a world where you show information and people say, interesting, and then they move on. No, you're basically, it's human, generally speaking. We just walk with barriers, frames, walls, and these walls don't go down with information. They go down with a generation.
I'll complement that saying, I think they go down with application. Okay. And where the intervention finds a use to solve somebody's problem.
Yeah, probably.
Then they're picked back up. But I'm thinking about the initial question, Tate. Where have I felt powerful? And I struggle with the question.
Yeah. Where in your life have you felt the most powerful and also the most powerless? It doesn't have to be at the same time.
Powerful and powerless. Yeah. I think there are many different types of power. And I'm going to describe a moment that I think was pivotal for me when I was starting to draft some frameworks that I use for community behavioral health integration. And in the writing process, realizing that I'm channeling something, and it felt very, very significant. And to the point where I, oddly enough, felt like there was almost like a ray of growth or like flowers coming off the top of my head. It was like a really odd feeling, like something's just, some energy is coming through me, and I'm writing this stuff out. And I was like, this needs, you just keep it going. Whatever this weird experience is, just keep it going. So I end up drafting all these models and being able to say, okay, there's something in this. This is really significant. And from there, it's the application of the different models and being able to use them. And that's where I've felt, okay, there's trusting this weird thing that almost felt like, I don't get psychotic. It just felt, very transcendent and bizarre. And in the end, I've been able to carry some of those ideas into application where they've made significant difference in people's lives. And I see that in many different ways, and I see the outcome of it, and I'm grateful for it, whether it's a court system or whether it's a individual who's in therapy or a family or a program or team. When all of a sudden things come together and they just feel that sense of relief, and well-being. And to me, it's wonderful. And the converse, though, is when I feel shut down, is when I am misunderstood, when the ideas don't translate, that they don't meet the actual pragmatic need. And I may be talking about something that's beautiful to me, but it's lost. I mean, it doesn't relate to the individual where they're at. And so it doesn't have that heuristic, of how that's going to be applied. So when I encounter that, it troubles me deeply, because it's sort of a state of my life, this sort of taking ideas and having a wisdom or understanding and not being able to share it. And that just makes me feel all the more alienated, but that's personal. So
it's interesting because we have the same high moments and the same low moments. Mm-hmm. Is that a generalized thing? You discover something, but the world is not there to meet it and receive it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Interesting.
Right. And you just have to, I have to accept that and step back. So
part of this trip is exploration of the masculine and the feminine, Egypt being the birth of feminism. We've been leaning into a lot of feminism this week, and it's been leaning a little bit into the masculine exploration, but I'm curious with you two, what does it mean to be masculine and the role of masculinity in the world?
So for myself, I've spent a lot of time addressing the question and really thinking about it in terms of what is the mature masculine. And it's not about gender identity as much as it is understanding kind of the masculine and feminine in terms of the duality of yin and yang as a core experience, and they have to mirror each other. But one is a propelling force, and the other one's a receiving force, and they dance together. And from that, we have, the gender that I'm born with and the role that I have and my identification with the father, grandfather, the son, the brother. And how do those relationships have a place? And how do they complement the feminine? How do they complement the sister, the mother, the grandmother? How do they fit in that equation? And I come down to, very often they become more distinct around sort of developmental milestones. There's places where my sense of the masculine makes more sense, in terms of a generative, cultivating, nurturing, and protective force that can also bring energy into a dynamic. But because I have a pretty well integrated feminine side, I see them playing back and forth. And I grew up with, a father who I think was very well integrated himself. And so I look at him as a model. And I look at my grandfather as a model, and I say, they weren't macho men. In fact, they resisted that, and they were very true to who they were or are. And to be able to stand in one's truth and to be able to hold that and be able to then think about masculinity as a positive force. Think about, how do we cultivate community? How do we cultivate families? How do we cultivate our colleagues? Okay, it's a different kind of energy, and men need each other in a different way. So then there's that separation again. You can start to identify there's some specialness there. Men need conversations with men to really understand that. Otherwise, I think that you get lost in what society is telling them they should think about themselves. And I think that's very distracting. The last way I would ever imagine myself is sort of like that Marlboro Man concept. It's just ridiculous to me. But a military figure could be a healer. Okay. Could be a lover. You see masculinity in those ways, and they're really, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but it's really in how they're applied. So, I don't know.
This trip has been very interesting for me in terms because I came here unknowing or not knowing that there was this focus, on feminism and the power of the feminine. But it was interesting because it brought a number of thought. It made me think about the whole thing, because it's not something that I'm, generally speaking, spending a whole lot of time thinking about. And the reason is probably because I'm much more sort of a personally engaged in, I should say, a path of non-duality. So you try to basically, let's put it this way. We've had past lives where I have been woman. There'll be future where I'll be woman. Others where I've been men. We're both. They're two polarities. And I think as we dance between these two polarities, the point is not so much to oppose them in terms of concept, but to unite them. So for me, the path has always been, let's call it, in French we say adequacy, but I think in English we would say adequacy, to be adequate.
Yeah.
So you're there in the moment. What is the moment right now? What is that moment calling for? And it will call for a mix always. It's never just one. A mix of the masculine and the feminine. Sometimes you need a little bit more firmness. Sometimes you need just a little bit more softness in the situation. Each moment, what is the blend that you need to bring right now? And you can only see that by subtracting from the moment your own traumas, your own hurts, your own opinions, your own filters, you need to remove all of that, which is really the path of non-duality and meditation, all of that. How do you subtract of yourself all the things that we carry and feed that creates a distortion of what is really the reality in front of you? And as you do that, then it's to find that balance, we're seeking the same thing. But for me, it's almost like in my own thinking process, I'm speaking just for me here, but separating them to better understand them almost feels for me damaging, because it's really in their unity that you can slowly find over time their strength for me. And so that's why this week has been a little bit of a challenge to do them. But I'm just speaking for me.
No, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was thinking about there is, I believe, a necessary constructive tension between them. I mean, this may just be me, but I think, better sex is going to occur between the tension that occurs between the maleness and the femaleness. Okay. And that if we're two eunuchs coming together or two asexuals coming together, that's just not going to fire. Okay. So that duality in whoever carries either part is necessary, and there is a necessary separation, but we have to know how to hold that without falling into the identity complex of it. Okay. What is true femininity? What is true masculinity? What am I? What is he or what is she? It gets messy that way. But if we understand that duality is in us, we can start to pull back from one and let somebody else carry the other, and then come back together. And it's a beautiful rejoining. Okay. And that tension allows that return. And I think that's where the magic is. And I think we don't know how to hold that separation without falling into the identity complex of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think that's why there's so much confusion now. because people want, and they need, and some folks, I'm not going to tell them what they can or can't believe about their bodies. I mean, it's theirs. But I would certainly want to encourage this understanding that we all have both, and that we all have experiences of each, and we can play off of each other. And that's the dance. Okay.
So this is not a rebuttal, really, to what Philip just said. It's really sort of a dance, with what he said. But for me, in this path, again, of non-duality, without focusing on it, but sort of contextualize what I'm thinking here is if we go into the mind of defining what they are and try to live what they are through the description of what they are, in my life, it's sort of a mistake. What I mean is that just eliminate all these definitions and be with that moment. I will never, even in my most feminine moment, nobody will ever tell me that I'm feminine. I'm very, I think I know what
Sure.
I have a very strong masculine presence, but I'm a warrior in how I do things. But I will work the softness, the patience, and all of that, the understanding, all of that. So I will never be asexual. To me, it's really whoever we are, whatever blend we end up with does not really matter. If with what you are, you bring what's adequate to the moment, then I think we've achieved something pretty good.
Yeah, fully agree with that. Perfect.
I'm curious to learn a little bit more about your shadows. Is there a side to you that you choose not to acknowledge?
I know there is. The tricky part about the shadow is it's the thing you can't actually see. So we see the manifestation of our shadow, kind of like we can see wind, but we don't know exactly where it comes from. And I'm always looking for that. I'm trying to be responsive to that. And for myself, there's an ego. I can get into a fairly grandiose place if I'm not careful. Sometimes even justifying my own virtue, and then deciding that I'm misunderstood, and doing a lot of internal considering that just takes me nowhere, just into internal knots. And so the shadow is a trick of the ego in most instances. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but
You're dancing around it a little bit.
Okay.
Do you have like an example? Yeah, go.
I was going to say, sorry, Philip, I don't want to cut your flow of thought.
We'll come back and forth. This is a good topic. It's going to take we'll peel the layers.
To me, if we go back to something we said earlier, or I said earlier in the podcast, just sit down and watch that thought process, and you can identify, what is it that is your inner atmosphere, if you want. In the same way, to me, because I agree with Philip, your shadow is by definition is your blind spot. You don't really see it, but you can see, you can sense it very well in that atmosphere. It's there. It's all these thoughts that are really stealing your presence. It's that generates that. It comes from that place. And as you sit down and observe this thought process, the thoughts themselves, don't dance with them. You just observe them. And when they show up, you just welcome them and you let them go. But you don't dance with them. You will taste the presence. You will taste the signature of that shadow. And then it allows you to observe where it's expressing itself into your daily life. And then you can diffuse a lot of it by just this power of observation. It's almost like if your consciousness is like a beacon. And when it looks at something without dancing with it, the moment you dance with it, by dancing, I mean, where is this thought going? Because we unite with a thought in a fraction of a second. Like this feeling of, let's say, anxiety or sadness comes into you, and within half a second, your thought process is, why am I sad? What has happened? And you find a reason for it. You will always find a reason why that emotion is there. But if you just look at it and just say, hey, I'm an antenna. I just picked up sadness passing through me. You observe it. If you just do this work of observation of everything, your consciousness is like a beacon on something, shedding light on it, diffuses it. And it loses power over you. So to me, it's how I'm observing. And if I'm speaking of me, it's this little this little judge inside that sees everything and just like immediately has an opinion about everything. And I need to tell him, just shut up.
Yeah.
It's just like whatever you bring in here is not adequate. It does not bring anything to the situation.
So you brought up judgment and you brought up ego. Those kind of
they're two sides of the same thing.
They are. But I want to go back to your signature of the shadow. Beautifully. That's great praise. And I think where I see that, where it comes back to me, is probably through my kids. Okay, they hold a mirror to us as parents, right? They kind of show us who we are, what we're not, and I see a lot of my failings as a human, as a father, through them. There's this tendency to, oh dang, this sucks. And at times it's beautiful because you can revel in what they've become and who they are. But that they're very good at replaying back, how and what ways we've missed them and misunderstood them or weren't present and didn't, just missed the mark is our error, our sin, so to speak. And I would say in many instances, there's, for me, a desire. The ego is to be the something to them, the provider, the achiever, the success, the person who could make magic happen for my kids, but forcing that when all they really wanted was someone to hang out with. Okay. And I'm not good at being in that space. And maybe because I missed it when I was a kid too. It's a drive. And I think that's the shadow side of fatherhood, I think. But I know for myself it is. But I think more men fall into that trap of being in that cycle of productivity to the point where they lose the family that they're trying to grow.
Getting back into something you were talking about, Philip, on this ego. And I know that this is really your expertise in terms of not the ego, because this is everybody's expertise, but verbalizing it and helping people see that, all this thing. And so it's almost like it's a comment, but it's a question to you, because my investigation of the ego is more like through that very personal quest. It's not something that I really discuss with anybody, but I've come with the conclusion that the ego is essentially everything in me that does something for my own benefit. Mm-hmm. So it goes very, very, very far. Yeah. And I, from what I hear and I read, oftentimes the ego is really just when you're selfish. Mm-hmm. The rest of the time, if you do something that is generous, it's not from the ego. And yet, sometimes you get a feeling of well-being by being generous. It's still egocentric. Mm-hmm. It's still centered around my own satisfaction, if you want. So in my world, ego is like, it goes really, really mm-hmm. deep. It's pretty much everything you do in the day, mm-hmm. unless you're really conscious of what you're doing right now and very adequate. Whatever the moment demands, I provide what that moment demands mm-hmm. without leaving a trace of me in it.
I'm with you on that, because I think ego is just part of the equation. It's part of the fabric of who we are. And I think we're always in some way satisfying ourselves with our own virtue, our own actions. And, it's never really absent. And I think we go back to this question of where are we in terms of this, this cradle of great faiths and these traditions that are here and the deity worship. And I'm reminded of the importance of having a higher calling or higher devotion, so that in the action of serving our egos, we're moving to something that's transpersonal, that's mm-hmm. going to carry us to a greater good. And that's our aim, is to head that way and to head towards, that divinity or that community, whatever it would be. And we're going to continue to make mistakes because we're going to serve our satisfactions. Okay. But to have that something that's beyond us and above us at all times, and keep that in mind, that we're still, flawed species working beneath that. And hopefully that will get us to a better place. But that's the only solution that I know to resolving that dynamic.
Sometimes you face a situation that requires, for example, firmness. You need to be firm. Mm-hmm. But are you firm because you're pressured within your being, unable to handle the situation? And it's actually a reaction. So it's deeply egocentric in a way. Yeah. And I don't say that negatively, like it's ego-based. Yeah. Or the situation demands firmness to shake up the situation and just say right now, the right thing, what is adequate for now is have firmness. Right. And these are like two different firmness. I remember I lived in an ashram many years ago, 30-some years ago. And the teacher there was a remarkable individual. And I remember being very surprised at one point. We had a meeting and he became very angry. And everybody was just like trembling. He was very, very angry. And I was sitting toward the end of the room and I was not part of what he was talking about. So I was sort of caught into the situation, wondering what was happening really. So at some point, he takes off and he leaves the room. And as he passes by me, he makes a very small pause, looks at me, winks, and smiles. And he says, "Sometimes we have to act." Yeah. And it always stayed with me because he was not angry because anger took hold of him. Mm-hmm. He was angry because the situation these people just needed to be shook up, Mm-hmm. And so that little moment has fed my life of adequacy. What is the moment asking to do to deliver the right thing? Sometimes just being soft and compassionate is just not helping. So anyway, so to me, that's my definition of ego. When you do things because the moment demands that, and not because it's a reaction from all my veils and misunderstanding and hurts and all of that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Perfect. What's the external? What is it? What's asked of me right now? Where do I need to be? What's the outside circumstance really require from me?
Yeah. And oftentimes, it's silence and smiling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For two men that like to talk, that's a lot to ask.
Nice. How does the role of the masculine and feminine play out in your professional work or space?
It's hard for me to respond to that question because I really never think of it like that. I probably seem like a broken record here, but my quest really in a situation is what is adequate? What do I need to bring at that moment? It's not an easy task, because we always, even if you try to subtract yourself from a situation, you're in it. It's hard to subtract yourself. A good friend of mine gave me this advice again that I've kept with me all these years, which is whenever you try to resolve a situation, try to resolve it as if it was your friend's situation. Your good friend is telling you, here's the situation that I'm facing. You will always tell your friend, oh, here's what I would do. And you see clearly because you're not emotionally taken by it. Mm-hmm. And that's the problem, is that whenever there's a problem, we are one of the element in that equation. Yes. And you can never see clearly the path forward when you're stuck into your angle of being an element of that equation. The only way to see clearly for the situation is extract yourself from it. And sometimes you are the idiot in the situation if you got to see it too. And but you can't see it if your feet are in it. Mm-hmm. So subtract yourself from the situation. And then if what it requires is whatever blend of feminine and masculine, I don't think of it in that way ever.
Interesting. I think I move in a different direction when I'm in a situation and I'm trying to address a problem, usually with people. I'm more identifying with that person or that situation and what part of me is that. Okay. And what does it tell me about myself? Mm-hmm. And how do I then understand it differently? So I'm taking it and I'm saying, what's my lesson in this? In the way this person is, or the circumstance that we're in, okay, how does that mirror who I am and the part of me that I need to then meet and engage? And then when I do that, I come to a place of a little bit more wholeness. And then what I offer back as far as solution is coming from with a little more balance. That being said, your question though was about where does gender play into the work that we do? And I'm going to just say that in the behavioral health business, it's all about relationships. Okay. That's the key ingredient. Okay. And women are much more relational and much more verbal, and so they engage services a little more readily, and it's not too difficult to engage women. Men, a whole different ball of wax. And they're often key ingredients to the family system or or to the relationship, and they're outside of the process altogether. So it's a matter of how do you, in my work, how do I understand that individual's value system or what's preoccupying them, and how do I get to that man and be able to say, okay, let's connect, let's relate, and how can you have a purpose coming back into this and feel valued and see yourself in a whole other light. And that's that translation piece for men who are very much abstracted and outside and kind of left in isolation, and yet they have powerful shadow force on the pathology or the illness or whatever the condition is that people are struggling with. They're key elements, and they need to be invited back in some way, but it's about engagement. And I think they're absolutely essential in terms of healing for both men and women. So I don't know if that's answering your question.
Yeah, I was going to say, Christian, there's a conversation that's been happening this week about whether the masculine and feminine should exist.
Should exist?
Yeah.
I mean, it does exist.
Yeah, but like the label of it.
The label. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's hard for me not to give like a more general answer. Labels in general is really our disease of the mind. We never relate to the thing. We relate to the label that we've placed on the thing. And it's kind of why I think we have so many conflicts, humans in general. I think it's the source of all conflicts is that we have different meaning for the label that we have put on something. Take somebody that you would, from a label standpoint, consider your enemy, and just go and have coffee with that person. And suddenly you just realize what you had in your mind is never the person that is in front of you. That's a little bit why I enjoyed this trip in Egypt. It's almost like no label. Everybody is smiling at you. And but yeah, I think labels is us labeling, conceptualizing everything. I mean, you go back again into like deep non-duality. That's what duality is. There's the thing, and there's the label that you put on the thing. That's it. Now everything has been made into two. You never relate with the thing. You always relate with your mental concept of the thing. And in that way, we all live in different little world. We're all right near at the same table, and somewhere we live in completely different worlds because we juggle different labels. We juggle them differently. Let's eliminate all these labels, and we will have an awesome world.
I agree 100% with that. And we may have talked about this somewhere along the way in terms of diagnostic labels and how destructive they can be in terms of mental health. And people identify with the label that they've been assigned. And somebody walks into my office and they come in with 6 different diagnoses. And I'm like, oh gosh, here we go again. Okay, this is somebody who was doctor shopping well enough to get people to give them a lot of identities.
Yeah, because that's what it is. They are identities.
They're identities.
You get the label, then you identify with it.
Right. And so what I do is I back it up and I'm going to talk, well, that's really a descriptor of a pattern. What's the pattern for you? How does that play out in your real life, and what does it mean to you? And I'm cognizant of this idea of, in shamanism, we see this, there's this skill of, if the idea would be that if you have a force that's hard to control, you can control it by giving it a name. Okay. And there's some value psychologically to that.
There is.
Okay. And that we want to be able to hold and contain this thing that is otherwise amorphous and spiraling out of control. And it seems to be taking over. We don't understand it. The spiral is bigger than us. Okay. And the tendency to want to put those boxes in place, there's a need for it, but then it becomes perverse. We overplay it. So then the question in my mind is, okay, let's look at that box that you've assigned yourself. How comfortable is it? What does it give you? Let's get real familiar with that box. And, let's navigate all the corners. And, and then after a while they start to see it and they realize, okay, it's kind of tight and smoggy in here. And I'm ready for a change. And then when once they're oriented and they can see what they've been doing to themselves in terms of their identity, then they're willing to make the shift. Okay, but that's the dance. That's the freeing and the releasing that occurs. But this labeling business is treacherous.
Yeah,
but we have to understand it before we can step into it and realize
exactly. I don't think we cannot not have labels. I mean, this is how we communicate. Yeah. We put a name and we put a word on a lot of things. I guess the idea is just to keep these boxes porous. Realizing that my definition of a certain word is different than the others, and I should be mindful that when I look at it from my perspective, it is just a perspective, and really live in that space.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it helps when we try to identify the forces that keep things the same. We're always looking for change and novelty and solutions and cures, but often we need to understand what are those forces that perpetuate continuity and sameness. And they're very powerful. They're defense structures. And I believe that we all have a need for what I call sort of security operations. We construct them in different ways. Some people have rituals in the way they dress in the morning, or how they iron their shirts, or how they eat their breakfast. They don't want to break from those routines because that's part of how they get shored up. Okay, we all need that, and we all have them hundreds of little things that we do that kind of are part of our sense of containment. And we don't understand this way we interface with community and society. There's all these little security operations that people are buying into. And as I see the world spinning faster and becoming more complex, and the forces of entropy are well in play, I think, people are more and more shoring themselves up with ideology or, fixations that they need to stay, maintain some identity or integrity. And that's where the challenge is for us, is to say, how do we balance that? How do we help people see who they are and what else is there, so that they don't have to keep choosing the false God or the false identification, okay, to move through life. And right now, my biggest fear, where we are as a culture, is that people are running headstrong into a delusion in what they think is right. And they don't realize it's meeting a really primitive need to be okay. And they're gonna lever that on other people, and that's terrifying. So,
nice, guys. Closing question. You've explored a little bit about what the trip's been like for you. I'm curious what your experience has been like here, and what your perception of Hatch is.
Well, I came here with, I would say it's rare that you get what you were expecting, but on this one, I was like sort of, I wouldn't say spot on, but I came in with really the main goal for me being here is reading and hearing about Hatch. I just thought, if I'm going to connect with people and I increase my family, if you want, because with the kind of work that I do, or quest that I do, non-duality, these kind of things, it's a very friend-restricting world. You don't socialize a whole lot. So I'm thinking, if I am to increase that circle, Hatch seems like a really good place to do that. So I came here just thinking, I just want to know new people. And I would say that I was served beyond all expectations. I mean, the quality of the people that I have met here, you see them and then they all look like really nice people. But the moment you start to scratch the surface, suddenly you get a huge sense of, you get very humble, because you realize you scratch the surface and you've got like very accomplished individual, very deep individuals, like every single one of them. So I was fulfilled beyond my expectation here with the family that I've discovered here. So, and I'll stay in contact, and then I will definitely become a Hatcher.
Yeah, beautiful. I'm going to compliment that. I agree 100%. Coming into this, I had the previous understanding through Heather that, she's like, you're going to love these people. You're like them. You got to meet this group, and we just hadn't gotten to it in 5 years. And so coming here, I had a positive notion of what it would be, but I wasn't quite prepared for what I would encounter when I got here. And I'm trying to describe this experience of, when we're kind of tuning a radio and we're getting multiple stations, or multiple signals in one spot, and there's just so much going on. And just imagine having that whole array of stations of songs that you absolutely love. And every one of them you want to listen to, and you're taking them all in, and it's just amazing and beautiful. And it's information overload, and you're just, okay, how do you step back and kind of, compartmentalize enough to really let those signals sink in? And the individuals in the structure and the way this milieu is set up, and the way the different disciplines are brought together, it speaks to me on so many levels. Is what I do in my own little microcosm of where I work, except it's a much larger, very beautiful version with, fascinating and intriguing individuals that I can learn from and hopefully contribute to. But the points of contact, just being able to go across the entire spectrum and connect, and sense the depth in each one of those. It's been really transformative for me.
From a let's say career standpoint, because you've got a lot of groups where you can go and you can meet people who they're high achievers. That's one thing. So you find that here, you talk to people and realize they are pretty high in their field, of work or expertise. And what I mean when I say you scratch below the surface is just realize it's not everybody who are at the top of their field of expertise who have deepened who they are as people, as individual, and to me that was I wouldn't say the revelation, but that's what touched me really a lot. Like hear the discussion that we have with Philip, and he's definitely, a beacon of his field. But the moment you scratch the surface, you see that it's somebody who has reflected a lot on himself, has done a lot of that work, vulnerable, all these things that you would find in an I don't know how to describe it, like a real human being on the quest to discover what is this all about, who we are, what's the nature of being a good human on this earth, for your brothers and sisters, that's to me what is like somebody who does really the work. Yeah. And this is like a group of that,
Yeah. And I think another part of that is just the generative approach. Each individual has their specialty and their areas of where they excel, but they're bringing other people into their world. There's this understanding that we all have these areas, where we can learn from each other, and to translate. You've been able to translate, your work and just make it, bring up the rest of us into understanding of, what's really happening at that stem cell level, and kind of how does it play out, and what's, where does it go in terms of the research. And it's that invitation to be known to different disciplines is a really beautiful part of Hatch, I think. Mm-hmm. Okay.
This is the Hatch podcast. Christian, Philip, thanks so much for being here. It was really a pleasure having you and talking to you this morning.
It was really fun.
Yeah. Thank you, Tate. Thank you, Christian.
Thank you.
Health is at a point of crisis and contention. Whether we examine the physical or mental health, externally or internally, the answer remains the same. We are ailing. And whether it's food systems, or stress, or lifestyle, or environmental impacts, or some diabolical synergy of all of those factors and more, humans are struggling across nearly all walks to find and experience the healing they seek. But maybe that's because we keep looking elsewhere, outside, when we should be looking in. All living things, and to some extent, the natural biological processes that define life itself, are created in perfectly, miraculously, curiously envisioned forms. In homeostasis, the tendency towards equilibrium between interdependent elements, particularly with regards to the psychological processes. Bodies know health, naturally. It's in the interventions, the needling and forcing and contorting of natural systems, whether through workplaces rife with stress, or diets full of additives, or manipulative interpersonal relationships. Our disease, in large part, is traceable to those things that impact and impede homeostasis. When we harness those natural mechanisms for healing, stem cells and cognition among them, we begin to answer our own questions, to find that inherent equilibrium that our bodies are, quite literally, designed to enjoy. We find within what is necessary to heal, without. Maybe, in the end, the greatest source of disease throughout all biological and cognitive systems isn't the factors and forces bombarding the self, but the insinuation that you have no control over that bombardment, that you are a victim in the hull, and that you are not, in fact, entirely and irrefutably at the very helm. This episode was produced by Yara Craner, Susan Karstensen, and me, Tate Chamberlain. A shout out to our media and production team, Jessica Byerly, Darko Sevilla, Kevin Hilton, Raymond Onsatagi, Sean Mackinson, and Mark Groner. A special thanks to Yara Craner, Anya Bulis, Jared Silverman, Pete Strom, Eitan Shapira, and Rachel Hicks. With so much gratitude to the Hatch supporters, Steelcase, the Kauffman Foundation, the Gwydion Fund, Envision Equality, the Hatch Volunteers, Board of Directors, Hatch Guardians, and the community who help make this work and mission possible. To learn more about Hatch, visit hatchexperience.org. Building community could not happen without food. And with that, I'd like to thank Whistle Pig Korean, Red Tractor Pizza, and Zocalo Coffee House. Do you have an issue that's riddled by gridlock in your community? Shoot me an email at tate@iaminterchange.org. That's tate@iaminterchange.org. Remember, share airtime and don't ruin dinner.